I went band for band with my aunt, and she couldn't handle the heat. My Aunt Magnolia had been the loudest woman in our family for 40 years. The thing about Magnolia is that she was wealthy, self-made, the owner of a small chain of beauty salons. The thing she made her entire identity out of is that she was the only one in our family who'd ever made anything of herself. Every holiday she brought it up, every birthday, every funeral. If your mother had ever had the guts to bet on herself, you'd be living differently. My mother Catalina was Magnolia's older sister, a hospice social worker, paid what hospice social workers are paid, who raised me alone, on that salary, after my father died when I was 9. My mother never responded to Magnolia, ever. My mother just smiled and refilled her wine. She was quiet in the way certain women are quiet. The quiet that, when you finally hear what it's been protecting, breaks your heart. On a Sunday in October, at Magnolia's 60th birthday party, Magnolia gave a speech, in front of 50 people, half toast, half humble brag, half attack. I just want my sister to know I love her, even though she chose differently, even though she chose poverty, even though she never bet on herself the way I did. My mother smiled, refilled her wine. I was 31 years old. I was a corporate banker. I was making a great deal of money I never told Magnolia about. I raised my glass and said very lightly, "Auntie, I appreciate your speech. I do want to make a small clarification. My mother didn't choose poverty. My mother chose me, and she chose other people's grandmothers on the worst days of their lives for 36 years. I think that's a beautiful thing to bet on." The room laughed. Magnolia did not laugh. Magnolia doubled down. "Sweetheart, that's adorable. But there's no shame in admitting your mom played small. Some of us bet bigger. The dumber she thinks I am, the more rope she'll hand me." I smiled, set my wine down. "Auntie, let's talk about betting. You always tell us you came up from nothing. I'd love to actually do the math with you, in public, right now, since it's your birthday and we're celebrating you." Magnolia was visibly surprised but not yet alarmed. "Sure, sweetheart, go ahead." "Great. How much did you start with when you opened your first salon?" $5,000 from scratch. Auntie, the first salon was opened in 1991. $5,000 in 1991 is about $11,000 today. Where did the $5,000 come from? My savings. Did Grandma and Grandpa contribute? Magnolia paused. "A little." "How much, Auntie?" "I don't remember." "I do. I have the deposit records from the estate file Grandma kept. They gave you $42,000 in 1991. That's $104,000 in today's money. They also paid the lease on your first location for the first 2 years. And they co-signed your second location in 1994. The room had gone very still. "And in 1996, after Mom had me, she came to Grandma and Grandpa to ask for help with my daycare. Do you remember what they told her?" Magnolia did not answer. "They told her no, because they'd already invested in Magnolia, and they couldn't do both. Mom never told me that until last year. Grandma told me on her deathbed." The room was silent. My mother was not looking at me. Her glass was frozen halfway to her mouth. I was not finished. "Auntie, you always tell us you bet on yourself. The truth is, our family bet on you. The truth is, my mother spent 36 years not telling me that, because she didn't want me to be angry. She wanted me to love you anyway. So I'm going to do exactly what she would want me to do. I'm going to keep coming to your birthdays. I'm going to keep clapping. But just so we're clear, Auntie, the next time you talk about how my mother played small in front of me, my mother, or her grandchildren, I'm going to read the deposit records aloud, every line item, with dates, to everyone in this room, because I have a folder, and I will read it like a bedtime story for the rest of your life." The room was gone. My cousin Octavia was quietly crying. Magnolia was frozen. Then Magnolia tried to laugh. The laugh did not land. My mother put her wine down, stood up, walked over to me, kissed me on the head, sat back down. That was the speech. But here's the thing. 3 days later, my mother called me, asking if I'd come over after work. When I got there, my mother was sitting at her kitchen table with a thick manila folder in front of her. She told me she wanted to give me something, that the deposit records I'd read at the party were only the first folder, that there were 3 more, that one of them had something I didn't know, that my father, before he died when I was 9, was not working at the company everyone told me he'd been working at, that he'd been working for Magnolia, off the books, that Magnolia refused to pay his last 6 months of wages before he died, that my mother never told me, for 22 years, because she wanted me to love my aunt, that she'd finally decided I deserved to know, but that this one, she told me gently, was not the one she wanted me to use. I sat there at my mother's kitchen table that night and opened the 3rd folder. Catalina sat across from me and walked me through it like she was reading me something fragile. The first thing I noticed was what wasn't there: pay stubs. For 6 months of work, there was not a single pay stub, not a single deposit receipt. What was there was my father's handwriting. Jebediah kept a ledger, a handwritten ledger in a small notebook with a blue cover that was soft from years of being held. He logged every single hour he worked at Magnolia's first salon, every shift, every task. Catalina turned the pages for me slowly because my hands were already not steady. 6 months of entries, dates in his careful print, hours next to each date, notes about what he did, inventory, cleaning, client prep, register work, 6 months of a man showing up and writing it all down because he believed the payment was coming. At the bottom of the last page, in my father's handwriting, there was a note. It said, "Magnolia says after the expansion. She'll pay after the expansion." My mother looked at me when I read that line and she said very quietly, "He wrote that about 2 months before he passed. He died before the expansion." Magnolia expanded the salon 7 months after my father was in the ground. She never paid him. I was shaking, not a little unsteady, my whole body shaking like I was cold, except I wasn't cold. I was the opposite of cold. I was so angry I could feel it in my teeth. I wanted to pick up the phone right then and call Magnolia. I wanted to read this ledger at the next family gathering. I wanted every person in our family to see my father's handwriting and know what she did to him. I looked at my mother and I said, "Mom, she stole from Dad. She stole from a dying man. Everyone needs to know this." My mother put her hand over mine, right there on top of the ledger, on top of my father's handwriting, and held it there, and she said, "That's why I'm giving it to you, because you're old enough to decide, but I need you to hear me." I didn't want to hear her. I wanted to stay in the anger because the anger felt right and clean and simple, but my mother kept talking. She said, "Your father loved your aunt. He believed she would pay him. He didn't die angry at her. He died believing in her. If you use this, you're not avenging him. You're rewriting him. And I spent 22 years making sure nobody rewrote your father." When she said that, I felt everything go out of me. The fire, the plan, the speech I was already writing in in my head, gone, because she was right. If I stood up at a family dinner and read that ledger out loud, I wouldn't be telling people who my father was. I'd be telling people who Magnolia was. And my father would become the man who got cheated, the victim, the fool who trusted the wrong person. And my mother had spent 22 years making sure that was not how anyone remembered him. I sat there a long time. I didn't say anything. Catalina didn't push. The thing is, I agreed. I told her I would hold the folder. I would not use it, for now. For now was doing a lot of work in that sentence and we both knew it. I put the folder in my bag and I drove home and put it in my desk drawer and told myself I could be patient. Maybe the birthday party was enough. Maybe Magnolia got the message. Maybe she would stop. 2 days later, my phone rang. It was Octavia. She was crying. The kind where someone is trying to talk and the words keep breaking apart in their mouth. She said, I need to tell you something, and I don't know how to say it, so I'm just going to say it. I told her to go ahead. She said, Magnolia's been calling everyone. She's telling the whole family that you made those numbers up. She's saying your mom put you up to it because she's always been jealous. She's saying the deposit records are fake and your mom doctored them. I had to put my hand on the counter because the room felt like it was tilting. Octavia kept going. She called Grandpa Oberon and he believes her. He told my mom that Catalina should be ashamed of herself. He said your mom raised a disrespectful daughter and the whole birthday thing was an attack. All I could think about was that folder in my desk drawer. The one I promised my mother I wouldn't use. The one that proved Magnolia didn't just take from her parents and her sister. She took from a man who was dying. And now she was on the phone with every member of our family telling them my mother was a liar and I was her weapon. I had promised to be patient, but Magnolia wasn't being patient. Magnolia was already making her next move. And my mother, the woman who'd spent 40 years smiling and never once defending herself, was about to become the villain of Magnolia's story. I thanked Octavia. I told her I loved her. I hung up, and I stood in my kitchen a very long time, thinking about what my mother said about not rewriting my father, thinking about what Magnolia was doing right now, rewriting my mother. I called my mother. She already knew. I could hear it in her voice the second she picked up. No surprise, no confusion, just this flat, tired sound, like someone who had been expecting a punch and finally felt it land. She said, Oberon called me this morning. She didn't say, your grandfather. She said his name, like he was just a person now, not a title. She said, he said I raised a disrespectful daughter, and that I should have taught you to be grateful Magnolia even invites us. Those words hit me in a way I wasn't ready for, because my grandfather said them to his own daughter, the one who never asked for anything, the one who worked hospice for 36 years and raised a kid alone, and his response to learning the truth was to call her and tell her she should be grateful. I asked Catalina what she said back, and she said, nothing. What would I say? He gave her the money. He knows what he gave her. He just doesn't want it said out loud. She was right. That was the thing that made me want to scream. Oberon knew. He'd always known. He knew he gave Magnolia $42,000. He knew he paid her lease. He knew he told Catalina no when she asked for help with daycare. He just didn't want anyone else to know. And Magnolia understood that about him. Magnolia understood that the people who helped her would rather be silent than admit what they gave, because admitting what they gave meant admitting who they chose. I hung up with my mother and I was so angry my hands were shaking again. I didn't even think about it. I called Oberon. He picked up on the second ring like he'd been waiting for it. And before I could even get a full sentence out, he said, I don't want to hear it. Your aunt built something. Your mother didn't. That's not cruelty. That's just the truth. And you had no right embarrassing Magnolia at her own party. His voice wasn't angry. It was firm, rehearsed, like someone had already told him what I'd say and what he should say back. I tried anyway. I said, Grandpa, I have the deposit records. They're from Grandma's estate file. They're real. You can look at them yourself. He cut me off. He said, Magnolia already told me you'd say that. She said Catalina gave you doctored papers. I know my daughter. She wouldn't lie to me. And then he hung up, not angry. The way someone hangs up when the conversation is over, and it was never really a conversation to begin with. It was a door closing. I stood there holding my phone and realized something that made my stomach feel like it was full of cement. Magnolia had already gotten to him. She'd already gotten to everyone. Every cousin, every uncle, every person who was in that room at the birthday party. She'd already told them her version. The version where I was the attacker, where my mother was the bitter, jealous sister who fed her daughter fake documents, where Magnolia was the victim. I was losing the story, and I hadn't even decided whether to fight yet. I was still sitting on a folder I promised my mother I wouldn't use, and while I was being careful with my father's memory, Magnolia was on the phone turning my mother into the villain. A few days later, I was at Catalina's apartment. I'd been coming over more since the birthday party, because I couldn't stand the idea of her sitting alone in that apartment hearing what people were saying about her with no one in the room. We were just sitting there. I was at the table. She was in the kitchen making tea, and then her phone rang. She looked at the screen and her face did this thing I will never forget. It didn't change. That's the thing. It didn't change at all. She just looked at the name and her whole body went still for a second, and then she answered it like she was answering a call from a doctor's office. Calm, prepared. She put it on speaker. I don't think she meant to, or maybe she did. Maybe she wanted me to hear it. Magnolia's voice came through and it was controlled, almost sweet, the kind of sweet that has teeth behind it. She said, Catalina, I love you, but you need to get your daughter under control. She embarrassed me in front of my friends. If she does it again, I will make sure this family knows exactly what kind of mother you've been, filling her head with lies about money you think you were owed. Catalina said nothing. She just stood there in her kitchen holding her phone like it weighed 100 pounds, and Magnolia kept going. Her voice got quieter, which made it worse. She said, and don't think I've forgotten that your husband worked for me out of charity. I gave him that job because you begged me to. He wasn't worth what I paid him, and we both know it. I heard those words come out of the speaker, and something inside me broke. Not broke like sadness, broke like a lock, like something that had been holding a door shut just snapped clean off. She said my father wasn't worth what she paid him. My father, Jebediah, the man whose handwriting I'd been holding in my hands a few days earlier. The man who showed up to her salon every single day for 6 months and logged every hour because he trusted her. The man who wrote, she'll pay after the expansion, with patience, not anger. The man who died before the expansion. The man she never paid. She said he wasn't worth what she paid him. She didn't pay him. I watched my mother. Catalina didn't cry. Catalina didn't flinch. Her jaw didn't tighten. She just stood there the way she's always stood there when Magnolia talked talks to her, absorbing it, letting it pass through her like she was made of something Magnolia's words couldn't stick to. And then she said, very quietly, "Okay, Magnolia," and she hung up. For a second, the apartment was so quiet I could hear the clock in the hallway. Catalina set the phone down on the counter. She turned and looked at me, and she said your father wasn't worth what she paid him. A pause. Then, she didn't pay him. My mother stood there for maybe 5 seconds. Then she walked to the hallway closet. She opened it. She reached up to the top shelf and pulled down the manila folder. The same one. The one with Jebediah's ledger inside. The one she had asked me to be careful with. The one she told me was not the one she wanted me to use. Catalina walked back to the kitchen table. She set the folder down in front of me. She sat down across from me, and she said 2 words, quiet and steady, like a woman who had finally run out of patience after 40 years of having more patience than any person should ever be asked to have. She said, "Use it. When your mother tells you to use the thing she spent 22 years protecting, you don't hesitate." That night, I went home and pulled out every single folder, all 4 of them. I spread them across my dining room table like I was building a case, because I was building a case. Folder 1 was the deposit records from my grandmother Paula's estate, $42,000 given to Magnolia in 1991. Folder 2 was the lease payments, 2 full years of rent on the first salon, paid by my grandparents Paula and Oberon. Folder 3 was the co-signed loan for the second location in 1994. And folder 4 was my father's handwritten work ledger, 6 months of hours, 6 months of a man writing down everything he did because he believed he would be paid. I sat there for hours and went through every page. I made a single, clean document, dates, amounts, sources. I wrote it all out in order, like a timeline, so that anyone reading it could follow the money from start to finish. Every line traced back to something real, a deposit slip, a bank record, a handwritten page in a dead man's notebook. I'm a corporate banker. I know what clean documentation looks like. I spent that whole night making sure this story was bulletproof. The next morning, I called Amos. Amos is a close friend who works in accounting. I've known him for years, and I trust him more than almost anyone outside my mother. I told him I needed him to look at some financial documents and tell me if the math held up. He said, "Bring it over." I went to his apartment that afternoon and laid the whole thing out. All 4 folders, my clean summary, every source record. He sat there for over an hour, flipping pages back and forth, cross-checking numbers, running his finger along dates. When he finally looked up, his face was serious. He said, "This is airtight. Every number traces back to a source document. If your aunt tries to say this is fake, she'd need to explain why your grandmother's estate records match your father's personal ledger." He paused. These 2 sets of documents were kept by 2 different people in 2 different decades. They weren't created together. They just tell the same story. That's not something you can fake. Hearing Amos say that out loud made it real in a way it hadn't been before. This wasn't just me being angry. This was a paper trail. This was 40 years of receipts that Magnolia never thought anyone would put together because she counted on everyone being too polite or too afraid to look. I thanked Amos. I took the folders home. I made copies of everything. 3 full sets. 1 for my bag, 1 for my desk, 1 for my mother's apartment, in case anything happened to the others. 2 days later, Octavia called me again. This time she wasn't crying. She sounded nervous, but not broken. Like someone who had information and wasn't sure whether giving it to me was going to make things better or blow everything up. She said, "Magnolia is planning a family dinner at Grandpa Oberon's house this Sunday." I asked who was invited. She said everyone. Octavia told me Magnolia had requested the dinner herself. She'd called Oberon and told him she wanted to clear the air and bring the family back together. Those were her exact words. Then Octavia's voice got quiet and she said, "But she's been rehearsing something." I heard her on the phone with Oberon going over talking points, like actual talking points, like she wrote them down and was practicing them. "She's going to make you apologize in front of everyone, or she's going to cut you and your mom off from the family. That's what this dinner is. It's not a peace offering, it's a trial." And she already picked the verdict. I stood there in my living room listening to Octavia, and I felt something settle in my chest. Not anger, not fear, something calmer, something that felt like a decision that had already been made. I said, "I'm coming to the dinner." Octavia went quiet for a second. Then she said, "I know." Then she said something I didn't expect. She said, "I'll be there too. I saw your mom's face at the birthday party when you were talking. She wasn't embarrassed. She was proud. Nobody's ever said any of that out loud before. I want to be in the room when you say the rest." When Octavia said that, I almost lost it, because that's the thing about families like ours. Everyone sees what's happening. Everyone watches the same person get torn down year after year, and nobody says anything. Not because they don't care, because they're scared. Octavia saw everything. She always saw it. She just never had anyone stand up first. I spent the next few days getting ready. I organized the clean document one more time. I double-checked every date, every amount, every source. I didn't tell Catalina exactly what I was planning. I love my mother more than I love anyone on this earth, but I know that if I told her the specifics, she would try to soften it. She would try to find a version of the truth that was gentle enough for Magnolia to survive, and I was done being gentle. There was no gentle version of "he wasn't worth what I paid him," about a man she never paid. I called Catalina the night before the dinner. It was late. She picked up on the first ring like she'd been sitting by the phone, which she probably had. I said, "Mom, I need you to trust me tomorrow. I need you to sit there and let me finish. No matter what Magnolia says. Can you do that?" Catalina was quiet for a long time. I could hear her breathing. Then she said, "I trust you. I've always trusted you. That's why I gave you the folder. That was all I needed." I didn't sleep much that night. I lay in bed going over the document in my head, running through every line of my father's handwriting that I'd looked at so many times I could see it with my eyes closed. I thought about a man who worked 6 months without pay because he believed in his wife's sister, and I decided that being careful didn't mean being silent. Being careful meant making sure that when I told the truth, I told all of it. Sunday came. I put the folder in my bag. I drove to Oberon's house in silence. When I pulled up, Magnolia's car was already in the driveway. Of course it was. She would have gotten there early. She would have set the room up the way she wanted it. Oberon was standing on the front porch. He saw me get out of my car. He didn't wave. He just stood there with his hands at his sides, watching me walk up the driveway like I was someone he wasn't sure he wanted in his house. I walked past him, into the dining room. Every chair was filled. Every face turned toward me when I came in.